Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Free Tours by Foot London. Firstly, my name is Sinead. I'm one of several guides here in London, and we've had to come up with a few new innovative ideas for touring in London presently. Obviously, with the current pandemic, it's been quite difficult for the tourist industry, but it's our pleasure to still show you around London. London's still standing. Now, this morning's tour, that I just want to take you on a little brief walk around one of the most recognisable squares in the world, Trafalgar Square. Now, Trafalgar Square has traditionally been the area of meeting points for celebrations and many demonstrations over the years. In more recent years, of course, the big demonstrations for the anti-lockdown protests and, of course, the Black Lives Matter. But we really associate it with celebrations, or the end of World War II celebrations, St. Patrick's Day celebrations, the end of Ramadan festival, the Eid festivals would take place here as well. But as a representation of the end of those demonstrations and gatherings, the newest instalment here on our Fourth Plinth is The End. This is called The End by Heather Phillipson. Now, it's a little noisy around here, so just follow me. We'll get a better view just as we're heading down the steps. Now, what's amazing about the Fourth Plinth here in Trafalgar Square, it's usually used for artistic impressions or artistic expressions, as it were. Every 2 years, the sculpture is replaced here. Now, as I mentioned, this is called The End by Heather Phillipson, and it's to represent kind of the instability. The cream that's melting on top with the cherry on top is to represent the instability of the world at present. Post-Brexit, coronavirus, and of course with Black Lives Matter protests in the area. What's interesting about this, though, you'll see the drone on top, that is beaming live images of Trafalgar Square. And you can log on to the website and see those live images at the moment. So to kind of represent the instability of the world at the moment, and particularly how we see the world visually through social media and also through our iPhones and our technology. So every 2 years this will be replaced, and that's the 13th sculpture that has been here in Trafalgar Square. Now, some of the plinths that you see around here, we're just going to have a look at a few of the statues. And of course, the most important is Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, and the most recognisable. More on him to come in just a moment. But two of the generals that are stationed here are Victorian generals here in the square. And we'll start with this chap here. Charles James Napier. Now, as you can see the statue here as well, just a Victorian general as well. There was a bit of controversy about these two statues because less is known about these gentlemen nowadays. And one of the former mayors, Ken Livingstone, was hoping to have them replaced, but of course, due to public objection, they remained in place themselves. But the most important one is Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, the famous victor of the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Now, Horatio Nelson famously lost his life in the Battle of Trafalgar. He was killed by sniper fire in the first 20 minutes of action. Now, ordinarily, these admirals would be buried at sea, but Nelson was such a highly decorated officer, they wanted to return his body back to the UK and have a state funeral for him in St. Paul's Cathedral. But how do you preserve a corpse for 3 weeks on board a ship? Well, they pickled his body, ladies and gents, in a vat of brandy. But that didn't work out to be the best of ideas, as you can imagine, because of course, by the time he returned to the UK, the brandy had seriously depleted, and that's because, quite literally, the soldiers on board had decided they wanted one last drink with their admiral. It's pretty gross, that one. Now, the base of Nelson's column are to depict his four most famous victories, and they are the bombardment of Copenhagen, the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, and the Battle of Trafalgar, made actually from French cannon. Now, obviously, the four most photographed lions in the world as well are the famous Trafalgar Square lions. The favourite artist of Queen Victoria was a gentleman by the name of Edwin Landseer. He was commissioned to sculpt these lions, and they're to represent the four corners of the British Kingdom. But he'd never actually seen a lion. So they got him the body of a dead lion from London Zoo. But of course, by the time he came to sculpting the mane, and he did, he sculpted the mane and face of the lion, but by the time he came to sculpting the body of the lion, well, the body of the dead lion had become very badly decomposed. So he actually modelled the bodies of the world's most famous lions on that of his golden retriever dog, ladies and gents. And if you do look at them, you'll see they're in very dog-like poses. Never seen the king of the jungle sitting like that. He's always regally lying on his side, basking under the sunshine. So there you have it, the biggest lion of them all, the face and mane of a lion on the body of a golden retriever. Now, before we move a little further over towards the square, the sun is a little directly in our way, but you might just make out the statue of King Charles I of England. Now, this statue marks the centralmost point of the entire city of London. So basically what that means is if you set your GPS system and you're making your way to London from, we'll say, Manchester, it will bring you right to the centre square, right here. Now, King Charles I of England is famously looking down Whitehall, which ironically is where he was executed in 1649 on the 30th of January. So, King Charles I of England. Now, a very interesting little police station, the smallest police station, in fact, reputedly in the world, was erected here in around the 1930s. And I want to show you this little structure over here, which is technically the smallest police station in the world. Now, of course, it's not manned by police at the moment, and regretfully, it's used by the janitors in the area as a broom closet. Inside here, in the 1930s when this was erected, and of course there was some very famous demonstration here in 1887, you had the Bloody Sunday riots, but the police felt somebody needed to be stationed in the area to keep a watchful eye. Now, technically a police station, and if the policeman felt that he was in any bit of difficulty whatsoever, when he lifted the receiver of his telephone, it was connected to Scotland Yard. That would flash a light here to alert policemen in the area that assistance was required. Not a police station anymore, but just one of those little funky facts, in London. Now, coming up here, this is William IV, King William IV of England. I always like to think that nowadays when we filter selfies, everybody wants to look as well as they possibly can. This is a very filtered statue, I can assure you. King George IV of England was also known as Georgie Porgy Pudding and Pie, who did quite literally kiss the girls and make them cry. Very, very robust man, exceptionally overweight, but of course that was fashionable in Georgian times, because the wealthier, the heavier you were, or the more weight you had, implied the more food you could afford, which implied the wealthier you were. So it is a very flattering image of Georgie Porgy Pudding and Pie, I can assure you. Now, as the demonstrators and protesters would arrive here in huge, huge numbers, they felt they needed some form of crowd control. This area was laid out actually by Charles Barry, the famous architect here in London, but the actual fountains themselves were Edward Lutyens, and they were used as crowd control measures. They've become a permanent fixture here now in Trafalgar Square, and they are a huge part of this area. Beautiful multicolored lights inside the fountains as well can change according to, well, whatever's happening in London at the time. Now, I want to take you up the steps here because I need to mention to you as well this beautiful church in the area. As you can see, this is St. Martin in the Fields Church, and it's known as the parish church, actually, of the royal family. It's where Prince Charles himself was baptized. Also, because of its close proximity to Chinatown, they do offer services in both Mandarin and Cantonese there. at the weekends. Now, it's also home to buskers, so it tends to get a bit loud around here, but it's always good fun and full of vibrant atmosphere in the area. So plenty to see and do here in Trafalgar Square. And when you do come to join us again at the end of this pandemic, which is thankfully coming to an end, we will be able to give you a lot more detail about the area. So that concludes almost the end of our little walkabout of Trafalgar Square, but more importantly, we left the best till last. Right behind you, ladies and gents, the National Gallery, housing one of the finest collections of Western European art in the world, but also one of the finest collections of Renaissance art in the world outside of Italy, of course. Artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Van Gogh, Monet, Cézanne, Renoir, Rembrandt, all free of charge for your viewing pleasure. An incredible service, and as I mentioned earlier on, the majority of art galleries and museums here in London are free of charge. But another part of the building is the National Portrait Gallery, which has an extensive collection of amazing portraits in there and beautiful exhibits. Now, there usually is a bit of a fee depending on what the exhibit is at the time, but over 215,000 portraits in the National Portrait Gallery. Obviously, your options are wide open, ladies and gents. An incredible place to visit and a must on your itinerary in London. Now, if you have enjoyed this just very short walk today around Trafalgar Square, please like and subscribe. If you have enjoyed the tour and you would like to buy me a cup of coffee, let's say, or you'll see the links to my PayPal and buy me a coffee at the end. But more importantly, thank you so much for joining us today, ladies and gents. It's been my absolute pleasure showing you around. We'll see you very soon. And thanks for joining Free Tours by Foot London.